Hi, welcome to Nancy Jean's Garden again. And Andre has come back to discuss with us some more about astrology because I got such rave reviews about having you on. I cannot tell you. And what I like about Andre is that he can really kind of explain it in such a way that you don't just become completely befuddled with geometric forms and other things. And he deals with archetypes. And I think that's really important because in what I do in the tarot and the things I use, that's how kind of I work with the world. So, Andre, do you have anything you'd like to say first or just want to go on with this?
With the houses?
Yes, we're going to discuss houses.
Right. So actually, the first thing I would say about houses is that you can get into quite a bit of confusion around it in that people will like to use different systems of house division. And I actually think it's not only easier, but a better way to treat them equivalent to the signs, which is why I use the whole sign system, which is also known as the sign equals house system. So then by the logic of that system, you have the first sign, which is where the Earth intersects with the horizon. The Earth is spinning at about 1,000 miles an hour toward the east. That's how the the ball is moving. And then when that motion intersects the horizon line, that's the ascendant. That's the first sign, right? And then you take that sign and then you go to the next one is the second sign, the next one is the third sign, and so on, without getting all caught up in lines of divisions where you start saying things like intercepted signs and getting all complicated. It's better to just treat it as whatever's rising is the first sign, then you get the second sign, third sign, and so on. But then when you're trying to understand how this system works or any system of houses works, you then look at the first sign as being, if you're doing the most natural chart, is the natural order, which is starting at Aries. So Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, those signs are the natural signs below the horizon. And then you get Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces. They're the natural signs above, right?
Right.
But of course, only 1 out of every 12 persons will have Aries rising. People could have, Capricorn rising, Aquarius rising. So you have to take that into account, but you're always interpreting the signs below as being related to the self, to the individual, to their privacy, to their personal concerns, to their family life, to their creativity, to their money, for example. All of that is below the horizon, and the signs above, whatever's there, counting 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, your place in the world, the relationships you make, the books you publish, the influence you have on society, the service you provide to society, etc. That's a way to break it down into big blocks around house division, right?
And also in that upper part is in the, because it's like I am, I have, I think, I feel, I love, I serve. That's the first 6. Kind of just to get a word, because I'm big on keywords. That's how I read cards. Then the 7, when you go 7, 8, 9, 10, I am becomes we are. That's where you're Libra. That's where you get into relationships. And so it's like an expansion of your sense of self when you get to that point. And I think that kind of tries to, because people are like, first you're telling me I have signs, now you're telling me I have houses. Where'd all these things fit? I can tell you your ascendant will always be in your first house.
Exactly right. That's right. Yeah.
What does someone do if they don't know when they were born? How do they know what was on the horizon?
If you don't know when you were born, you don't know what's on the horizon. So hopefully you can at least have a range so you can try to explore it and try to correct it. If you absolutely do not know anything about it, it could be any time, then it's going to be tricky, to come up with a valid ascendant. And then a case like that, depending on how you want to relate to astrology, because if you say you want to study astrology, then you have a real problem on your hands, because you should look for that time, figure out a way, to come up with that time. But if you're seeking guidance, advice from astrology, I can work with a chart that has no time, and I have enough astrology to be able to provide really good guidance, particularly if the person is interested in manifesting the better side of the chart, the potential,
Right.
which is really the best way to use astrology. So there it depends, on what the objective is. But obviously, if you're trying to study astrology, it's incredibly frustrating if you can't say what time you are.
Yeah, well, when I studied, I knew exactly what my time was, but then the astrologer I trained with, she had me go back and make sure that the major events in my life matched with what my mother had told me. And it was so accurate that she said, yours is perfect. And she used to teach people, I never got this far in her classes, to how to go and look at someone's chart and sort of figure out what time they might be born. If you knew several major events from their life, I don't know how she did it, but she used to use my chart because she was so sure it was correct. And two of the women that took her class got to within 2 minutes of when I was born.
Yeah, it's definitely doable, because
it's a lot of work.
You can, well, yeah, I mean, the thing is, things are a lot of work until you get better at it, and then it's not as much work, right? So, for example, when a person gives you a time that's precise, one of the things you can look at is this thing called the progressed ascendant. So you're born with an ascendant, but then it progresses.
Right.
And when it progresses, it'll change signs at most 4 times in your life, but usually more like 3 and sometimes only 2, depending on where you're born. Those changes are remarkable at correlating with a change of life, pretty much to the month. So that's one. But then you can look at all kinds of other things, transits, different things that point to a time being more or less accurate. So yeah, it's workable, but I'll admit, I prefer to know the person's time and not do that kind of work. I prefer to hear, I was born at 6:32 p.m. Perfect. Okay. Then I cast the chart, and you're going to be, even if you're a minute or 2 off, you'll be pretty good in assessing,
Yeah, you'd have to have a pretty weird time to throw it off completely, because the thing that moves the fastest is really the moon, isn't that on the chart?
The moon is the second fastest. What moves the fastest is the ascendant.
Okay, the sun, yeah.
The ascendant, like the Earth as it's moving toward the eastern horizon point, you get about every 4 minutes, you get a degree change. So then if a person is, say, 20 minutes off, then they could be off 5 degrees, 6 degrees. That'll cause all kinds of problems later when you're trying to get at key moments in a person's life.
Well,
so it's always best if you have a time. Let's just say that.
Right.
I've noticed that since about 1960 or so, most people have access to their time through hospital records. It's more, once you start getting into the 50s and especially the 40s, either you can't get a time, or they'll say, I was born at 10. Immediately I think, really? Was it 10, or could it have been 5 to 10, 10 over? You wonder, because they weren't paying attention to the time as much.
Well, a lot of people were born at home too.
Yeah, exactly. So write it down. Yeah, precisely. Yeah.
Okay.
It is, I mean, charts are, from the vantage point of an astrologer, your time is like a precious, bit of data, You should guard carefully, because it's
I've heard that. One of the things Helen used to beat into us is, don't give anybody your birth time. And I'm like, they're going to get me another way if they want to come get me. Don't worry about it.
That comes in away from the tradition of the astrology being a kind of occult, and this notion that someone. First of all, my first question would be, why is someone out to get you? That already makes me wonder what's happening in your life, because once you start to get your energy together, the whole idea is to have less, if any, enemies. Why would you have any enemies, right? So, but even if you did, let's say you're the kind of person that, for whatever reason, someone wants to do you harm, if your energy is strong, then what can they do to you? What exactly are they going to do to you? Is the logic that they'll attempt to use your chart to hit you at your lowest point? I mean, I suppose, but I'm not worried about that.
No, I'm trust me, I wasn't worried about anybody using my chart like that anyway. Most people I know were just confused that I ever read cards, much less knew about a chart. Right. So you use the whole sign system and the whole house system. That's what it's called, right? And that means that your chart is 12 equal pieces.
Correct.
12
okay. Pieces with 12 equal signs. And so sometimes what confuses people who are used to things like these quadrant systems where they put the line and then they put these boxes that are an equal size and the thing is that, let's say a person has 20 degrees rising of well, that sign, let's say it's, for example, Sagittarius. They're Sagittarius rising. But then let's say that they have the sun at 5 degrees Sagittarius. That's still a first house planet, right? Though it's above the line. And in fact, when it's above the line, it's stronger than if it's below the line. Because if you think about it, in the womb, the ascendant crosses that sun, imprints, and so the person is born with more, not less confidence. That's something, by the way, that was talked about by this French astrologer named Gacquelin, who did these studies, and he found that planets above the line were stronger than if they were below the line, which is counterintuitive to people that use the boxes and say, no, if it's above the line, it's weaker because it's in they call it the cadent place for the planet. No, it's actually stronger. So, but without getting too complicated, the whole idea is once you just focus what sign is rising, everything there rises. House 1, next one 2, the one above that is 12, the one above that is 11, and so no confusion. And from the perspective of someone trying to learn, it's much easier, than getting all hung up on these house cusps. And one of the reasons I stopped using those was around my 8th, 9th year, is I couldn't see any effect. I would see these cusps and planet would go through them. I'd say, well, what's going on? Unless I made it up. I could project and pretend that something had changed. No, it just wasn't happening. So then I began to notice that the signs were actually vibing properly, to what was going on. And that's why I started to use the whole sign system. But by the way, I'm not alone. And I noticed that when astrologers are more experienced, by and large, they use whole sign. Some that are really good don't. So I can accept that too. There are a couple of astrologers I know who are great astrologers and use the quadrant systems. But there are plenty of great astrologers, especially the ones that are really experienced, that turn to the sign equals house or whole sign. So I'm in good company. Let's just say that.
Yeah, when I studied with her, we did Placidus, which is the one where you get the intercepted signs. And she was explaining that the planets are going around like this, but actually they're not. They're on this tilted thing. And I was like, that's it was hard enough to deal with everything on a wheel.
Yeah, no, and Placidus, if you go far enough north, like if you try to draw charts in Alaska, they look really weird because Alaska is so far north, you'll get a midheaven that is practically next to the ascendant. And it just, to me, it's like you're saying astrology only works in a range, part of the earth. And then as I say, check it for yourself. Study, check it out. There are all kinds of discoveries you make that show you that using the signs as the houses works best. So that's pretty much how I would summarize it.
Okay. If someone were to start looking, if you have more planets in one house than another, is that like a big deal or?
No, it's not so much a big deal as what it tells you is that when a house is occupied with planets, it does become an important house. But you always have to track where the planet is and what house it rules. And it's very frequent that the planet will have really strong correlations to the house it rules, and it'll explain what's going on, such as, for example, say a planet is in the, let's say in the first house,
Mm-hmm.
happens to rule the fourth. That planet, when it gets action in a transit, will reflect the affairs of the fourth, which is family. And you wouldn't necessarily, know that unless you looked at the rulership, because you'd say, oh, it's in the house of self. It's the first house. It's a self thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's a self thing, but it rules the fourth. And sometimes it could be ruling the opposite house, like the relationship house. So then the planet is in the house of self, but rules for example, say if a person has Aries rising with Venus, Venus in Libra.
Mm-hmm.
How would that work? Sorry. Aries rising with Venus also in Aries, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, Venus rules the seventh because Venus rules.
Right.
So now if something happens to that Venus, you look to the affairs of the seventh, which are Libra. And also the second, because the second is also Venus rule.
Right.
The planet is in the first and affects the second and the seventh, right? That I use all the time when I'm trying to figure out what's happening in a person's chart. And it's not made up. I mean, you'll see again and again that a person, for example, will bring in a certain concern, and you can see that it's the rulership of that planet that tells you what the event or the psychological state is, and not the planet's place of residence. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. And yes. Because it's like I said, you're dealing with archetypes, you're dealing with energies that have certain powers within each other, kind of. I mean, how they affect you. And so it's understanding that even though it might be in your first house, which is sort of your appearance and what you have, actually, because it's there, it also can rule your appearance, also could be affected by what you have, which would be the second house I have. And then Venus, which is up with Libra also. And it's, what you just were talking about, interrelationships and balancing things with other people.
Right, correct. And the thing is, where the rubber meets the road would be the person. Let's take, for example, suppose now Saturn is conjoining that Venus.
Mm-hmm.
So then Saturn being Saturn, it might bring in a more difficult message. Let's say if the karma in a relationship has reached a bad point, and
Mm-hmm.
so then it goes over Venus, and you could build the story, and it's all about self and appearance, but then what they're telling you is no, it's because a relationship just ended, or a relationship is causing me problems, and that's because the Venus rules the seventh, right?
Mm-hmm.
It rules the other side. So you get actual events, actual psychological states pointing to the other side. But what if it's, for example, the sixth, which is health, right? Now you bring that in, or it could be the fifth, which is children, and those, or maybe it's a love affair.
Mm-hmm.
Connection to the so the idea is that look to where the planet is and look to where it points to as well, because both are important.
Mm-hmm.
The story. Yeah.
What about some of the eighth house, which is, when you look up quick, like if you look at a little thing, like I have things in my eighth house and it says things like sex, death, and change. I mean, not small little items.
And taxes.
And taxes. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I must have had a hell of a burden from that. I worked as an accountant and paid business taxes for years. So
yeah. So in your eighth house there are planets there.
In the eighth house, I've got Mercury and Venus, and Mercury and Uranus.
Yeah. I mean, the eighth is a house with often a bad reputation because of the things that it rules.
Mm-hmm.
And one example, which this you'll see again and again, because it's a place of transformation and things like repair and death and rebirth.
Mm-hmm.
Those things like if you go for surgery, you often see the eighth
Mm-hmm.
prominent. But then lots of surgeries are successful. You go there, you get a repair, and you come out and you feel better.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the idea that that adage that says if something doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger. So the eighth is where you repair and rejuvenate and resuscitate. I'll give you an example of a really curious very successful eighth house personality is this famous tennis player. You may have heard of him, Rafael Nadal.
Mm-hmm.
He is this phenom of tennis. He's a Gemini, which is the hand, so he's very good with his hand.
Mm-hmm.
That's why he plays tennis. But he has the sun in the eighth, and the way it has operated in his life is he's had, not for that reason, but there are other things in his chart that point to the possibility of injury.
Mm-hmm.
He's had many injuries across his 15 years as being one of the top players in the planet, literally one of the best. But what happens to him is he'll get injured, and then it's as though he's away from the game and he resuscitates, comes back, and he's even better than he was before. And he's done it more than once. I mean, like 4 or 5 times, and always defied expectations. So that's an example of someone who is, relating really well to the energy of that house. There's a change, a repair is needed. It's threatening, but back he comes, and he's in good shape again. Another way to look at it would be that would be a place for an accountant, because accountants do taxes, for example, right? Which is
right. It's what I ended up doing. It was not what I studied accounting to end up doing, but
yeah, right.
It's where I ended up.
Or now you could veer off into, suppose a person is a very successful funeral parlor operator in that house because it's the house of death, or waste disposal. That's another Scorpio thing, and I'm sure there are people that are doing great at that, and that's needed for society. Or recycling. So, or you could go into money. The eighth is, you think of it as Taurus, Scorpio. Taurus is the second, Scorpio is the eighth. Taurus is material, hard money, but it's not liquid. Liquidity is Scorpio. So markets are in the Scorpio locality, which is the eighth. That's where money circulates. You can actually use it. So you get bankers there, you get investors. The notion of a mutual fund is the house, because it's money that is pooled. It's like, think of the seventh is relationship. The eighth is the energies of relationship. So it's the money of a relationship, but it's a relationship you have with Fidelity or whatever. Everybody's pooling their money, right? That's the side. So there are lots of positives to that house, to that, sign arrangement or sign order. But yeah, then you're looking at a chart. If someone passes away, you often see that house prominent as well. So
what, before we knew Pluto was there, what planet did they assign to Scorpio?
Mars. And I still continue to use, when I do rulerships, I always do the first rulership is the original ruler, and the second, like the outer planets are co-rulers of that area. I don't just say Scorpio is all Pluto. It's Mars and Pluto.
Yeah.
Or for example, Aquarius would be Saturn and Uranus, and Pisces is Jupiter and Neptune. I use those. And you will notice when you do this that the transits of the original planet relate to that house, or things that happen to that planet. So it's not made up. It's actually correct. Yeah. But yeah, to answer your question, it was Mars before.
Yeah, because you got to realize that a lot of these planets weren't found until the 1800s, right? And some in the 1900s. So Uranus was found in the early 1900s. Is that right?
No. Uranus was found in 1790. Uranus correlates with the Industrial Revolution, which is why it rules technology, and it's not made up. It actually rules electricity, and it is blatantly electricity. Like I remember in the 70s, I'm not making this up, there was a TV program where they were interviewing these astrologers, trying to give them a sort of a fun and challenging thing to try to figure out who this person was or what they did. And they gave them a chart that had Uranus. This person had Uranus wired in all kinds of ways. And they all concluded that they said, this is the person who had a chart that has so much electricity they were probably struck by lightning. But the way the chart was, it wasn't a deadly Uranus. So this person had survived multiple lightning hits. Like one lightning strikes went through their hat. It was hilarious. But it's that thing where astrology is both deadly accurate and also a bit comical at times. Because
and
that's like a circus act, by lightning. But yeah, electricity.
Take the show on the road. Anyway, so let me see. So but I did know that where some of the outer planets were not there when the Greeks and Romans were around, that we've gone and found them.
Yeah.
And now we're bringing in all of the asteroids.
Well, yeah, we sort of are, although, you have to be careful, because if you bring in too many, I use 11. I use everything up to Pluto plus Eris, because Eris was the displacement of Pluto, so I give it extra value. And with that, that's a lot. If you start putting in the 4 asteroids, Juno, Pallas Athena, Ceres, Vesta, now you've got even more. And if you start adding trans-Neptunians, pretty soon you have a major mess. I mean, you're going to have to start, distilling that so you can read the chart properly, or you'll go off on tangents and so on, right? So, but that doesn't affect the houses. The houses
are what they are.
Yeah, they are what they are. Yeah, I mean, if you want to get with houses, you'd say 1st, 7th, that polarity is self-other, self-relationship, literally. 2nd, 8th is the resources of self, money, and the resources of the relationship, other people's money, right? Or shared money. Then you would say the 3rd is mind, or the thinking mind of the self, and the 9th is a more collective mind. So it's the logic that at the 3rd you have data or information, and in the 9th you publish it, right? And so that axis relates to schooling and learning and publishing and communicating. And so many times, if a person has a lot of 3rd house planets, they're in that industry, they'll be doing something involving communications. But then you can see how they might tell you they're in sales. Why? Because sales is talking and convincing and communicating. So it's very common. Or advertising, because you're putting out information to try to get people to buy something. But also maybe they'll say, I teach, I publish, I lecture, which is also the 9th. Or I could be in a travel business, because the 9th is distance travel. The 3rd is transportation, near-term transportation. So all of those fit into that 3-9 axis. Then you get 4-10, which is 4 is home, family, private, the most private part of your life. The 10th is the most public. So home for the 4th, 10th for career. It's pretty straightforward. Then 5-11 is 5 is the place of creativity, children, and basically playing. Creativity as play. The 11th, you could call it a kind of social creativity or social play. In the 11th, you reach your social, the height of your social power, let's say, which is the height of your social creativity, is the other polarity to the 5th. And then 6-12, they're the health and repair, as well as service, social service houses, which would be, by the way, really good fits to the meanings of Virgo and Pisces. So this is where you said earlier about Aries, Taurus, Gemini being the natural order. When you're trying to understand houses, if you consider the signs, you get all the meanings that you need. So when you say 4 and 10 are family and career, well, that's because Cancer is the natural sign of home and family, whereas the 10th Capricorn is the natural sign of government, for example, right?
Right.
Which is the idea of the world of career and so on. So this is why learning the signs and equating them to the houses gets you there much more quickly than getting all tangled up in fancy, divisions and measurements that will probably only confuse you, in my opinion. That's
the other thing is, and I always point this out to people when they talk to me about, well, I don't understand about astrology, is Venus and Mercury will never be very far from your sun. I mean, correct. They mostly, because if you think about it, logically with their position, they're between the sun. We're between the sun and it. Those two can't get too far. And you think about that. So when you're born, those symbols of Venus and Mercury are never going to be born too far from your ego, the sun.
Correct. That's correct. Yeah. Yeah. So it's like saying, there you would say, it's like equivalent to your values, Venus. Think think it's important what you find attractive, because Venus is your sense of, oh, I wonder what's like. That's why a man goes toward his Venus, to find a woman.
Mm-hmm.
The Venus is the woman's sense of her own beauty. So that's a really primary dominant value everyone holds. And then Mercury is the mind. It's the way you think. It's the way you process. It's the way you analyze. It's your memory capacity. It's super important. And yeah, they're close to the sun, right? And
So they would
sometimes they can rise before the sun or after the sun. So you get a few distinctions like that. But yeah, to answer your question, you will see Venus most frequently, it's in the same sign as the sun, or the one before, or the one after. Same with like that. Yeah.
They can't wander too far. What is it when someone says you were born and your planet was out of bounds? What does that mean?
Okay, that's a little more specialized. That's where what you're doing is you're saying when you're assessing what sign they're in, you have to picture that they're spinning on the planets spin on imagine it's like a frisbee, and they're all on the plane of the frisbee. Well, turns out though, it's not exactly a flat frisbee. The planets will go up above the frisbee or below the frisbee, because the frisbee is east-west. The planets can go north-south too. So
Okay.
and the way you measure that is the sun. When you look outside, and if you look at when it's summer, you'll see the sun is in a certain part of the sky, and then when it's winter, it goes south, right? So
Right.
So then the gap between where the sun is way, way, way north and there's when it's way, way, way south. Well, the planets do that too. And when they go outside that point of the sun to the north or to the south, then we say they're out of bounds, which means they're above the frisbee. They're sort of jutting out. And what happens is they're going to be extra strong for good or for not so good. So for example, if you notice a person, let's say they have out of bounds Mars, they might be either very, very action oriented and very effective through their action, or they might be aggressive, even violent because of that Mars, right? Or a famous example of someone who had something out of bounds that was critical, Einstein. Einstein had the moon in Sagittarius out of bounds, right? Sagittarius is the sign of outer space. This guy was a macro genius. He created a system. No one had thought of this. I mean, he started talking what seemed like crazy. He was saying, no, space and time are the same, and he described it in a way that, for the time, was brand new. It was because his moon, a Sagittarian moon, which is a very imaginative, very macro type of moon, was in Sagittarius, and so that's an example of a positive manifestation.
Yeah,
it could.
I knew nothing about this. I knew nothing about out of bounds when I was studying it. Nobody even mentioned it. And I had someone who did a chart for me, and they showed, you've undoubtedly seen those charts where they run your signs this way across, starting here and then moving across to there. And all my all my planets are kind of, trotting along like they should be. And then there's this giant thing swooping in and out of that chart. I mean, really big. I said, what the hell's that? And she said, oh, you were born with an out of bounds moon.
There you go. Yeah. No, and by the way, the moon, when you can, this is what is fascinating. When you're into astrology, you start looking at these. It's a cyclical thing. You're seeing these patterns that repeat. The moon does this thing where if you draw the lines, it's out of bounds in and out, like not always, but you see it do this out of bounds thing for about 9 years. And then the next 9 years, it doesn't do it, right? And then it starts again. So some people have it and some people don't. And I run across this all the time where I always look at if a planet is out of bounds when I'm reading a chart. If I see it out of bounds, okay, I know that moon is extra strong. But then you don't know until you ask. I mean, what is the person doing with the moon? It could be as simple as the moon being the natural ruler of Cancer, and the fourth rules things like real estate, but it rules things like food as well. So they might just be really interested in cooking or baking, or it might be that they'll tell you, oh no, I'm a real estate tycoon, or I operate a chain of restaurants. So, something's going on to reflect that extra strength for the moon. depending on which choice they made, right? So
Yeah.
but it is a valid thing, though. It's definitely something to consider.
Yeah, we tried to look at the dates and see, and they did correlate with a few weird things that had happened around me. So, it was something I knew nothing about.
I mean, out of bounds is even more strange than you think. One of the things about out of bounds is to then, if you're really serious about digging into your chart, you can spot, say you're born under a out of bounds moon, or maybe not even born under it, but if you're born in the 9-year period, what will happen is through progression, you'll have periods when it's out of bounds, which last 2+ years, right?
Mm-hmm.
When it's out of bounds by progression, which is a certain period of time, you will then reach higher or get out of bounds. You more. The Orange Menace, he wasn't born on an out of bounds moon, but he has a lot of out of bounds planets, of course, predictably, because you would expect a guy like him. But in 2015, 2016, when he was at the apex of his fame, progressed moon went out of bounds right then during that.
Oh dear.
When I thought that makes perfect sense. In addition to a few other things, but that was definitely there, right? So then when you're following your chart, you would want to know when those years are, because that reflects that impulse to break away and step out of bounds, right? To see if you can get something to
I
change.
think I was told that I'm in a cycle of an out of bounds progressed moon.
There you go. Yeah. So then that would.
So I lived with it for 70 years and didn't know it was there. It will continue to. I'll struggle on.
Yeah. Well, no. I mean, look, it's another factor. I mean, astrology is really rich with meaning, and where it can really motivate you is when you notice something and you say, "Oh yeah, that's totally true. That's exactly what happened." Then you now strategize, because you'll say, well, that happened on the previous cycle. How can I do it a little bit better this time? And it's kind of the same impulse. And you trust the fact that they're valid cycles and not just made up, stories. You're telling.
Yeah. And if it's there, it's there. And I know people are like, well, what does that really mean? And I said, it means what you make of it. It means what you do with the energy when it comes to you.
Yeah, that's true too. That's true. That's exactly true. Yeah. Although it would be the case to say, like, take the out of bounds moon. If you establish that what someone did with a previous one, let's say, right, previous progressed, out of bounds moon, then you want to see, well, how successful was it? What are you trying to do this time? And it's like you're getting a sense of how to navigate through that period, that you or that you might be in already, right?
Well, okay. What do we need to know in the next few months that you can see that are sort of for the collective?
For the collective, I would say, well, one that is just started, like yesterday, Jupiter entered Aries, right? So Jupiter entering Aries is really expansionary for people that are Aries. Works really well for Sagittarius and Leo because it's making trines and to those signs. Fairly well also for Aquarius and Gemini, because that's the sextile. A little less well if you're caught in the opposition, which would be Libras, Capricorns, and Cancers, just because when you get a square pattern there, it's more likely to go astray. So you have to be extra careful not to be dragged into the downside of Jupiter, which is overexpansion, overconfidence, over something. But even then, if you're careful and you look at the situation, carefully, then you could expand quite well, even for those signs, right? And Jupiter in Aries, if you just want to look at a current situation in the U.S., because we know for sure the U.S. is a Cancer country, and it has planets in early Cancer plus the sun at 13. And this Roe v. Wade thing, you notice that Jupiter is moving into Aries, and it'll be stationing at 9 degrees Aries at the end of July. But in June, it's already squaring those early Cancer planets for the US.
Right.
Jupiter is the natural natural planet, as the ruler of Sagittarius, is the natural ruler of laws, because right? So Jupiter in square, this suggests exactly what's going on in the country. There's a very contentious, divisive situation because the planet is in square. And so a matter of a law is coming into the foreground and is causing division in the country, which I think is a pretty accurate reflection, right, of the current state of affairs. And it happens to coincide with when they'll release the decision, which, June, July, that's when Jupiter's making the square. Now here we're kind of stepping outside the houses, but we're basically saying Jupiter is that planet generically, wearing the sun of the US chart, and it also rules, at least in the chart that I use, it rules the US ascendant. So it's a super important planet, in terms of what it's doing. And by the way, if you wanted to add a little more flavor, it's going to be in Aries, which is the sign of children, which sounds suspiciously like what the law is about, right? Because it's reproductive rights. So it's pretty accurate. The Sibley chart for the US, to me, it constantly gives signals back that it's the correct chart, because it's weird to see it there, at a time when that's exactly what is happening, basically. The fifth sign in the US chart.
And isn't the summertime when normally the big outer planets go retrograde? For the US, or for where we are, or for everybody, I guess.
No, it would be for everybody, but I don't know if that's exactly true. Saturn goes retrograde in June this year. So I'll call them up for you. Saturn goes retrograde in June. So you might be right. Uranus, Jupiter is going retrograde in July. Uranus would be August. But then Saturn isn't, the next is going direct. That happens in the fall, in October. Let's see, is there another? Well, Neptune is already retrograde. So yeah, you're right. This one before. Yeah, at least this year for sure, and next year, because when planets are making these movements, they stay in the same pattern for a while, right? For instance, Jupiter is doing 12-year cycles with 1 year per sign.
Right.
It's happening around May, the mid-spring, late spring. And so every May, June, it hops to the next, it repeats. And the same with retrograde cycles. Yes.
Yeah, but didn't Jupiter kind of run right through Pisces? Because it seems like it.
Well, it did, but Jupiter was in Pisces from May of 21 to August of 21, which was the effective end of COVID, and that vaccines came online. It wasn't the end of COVID, but anybody that got vaccinated had a huge edge on that pandemic from Jupiter entering Pisces during that part of 21.
Right.
And it raced through, and from January to just now, into Pisces. But it comes back into Pisces November and December.
Oh, okay.
Okay, which means that in a certain way, this is still the Pisces year, and is very helpful to Joe Biden because he has his planets in super late Scorpio, which means that station in November is trining his sun. Right? That's astrology in action, where you see it in a really good place for somebody.
Oh, good.
Pisces. Yeah.
I like to hear nice things are happening to people with late Scorpio, because that's what I have some in my chart.
Oh, yeah. No, if you have late Scorpio, then the only thing to be careful with is that always remember Jupiter doesn't like working. Jupiter is a happy party type of planet. To the extent that you've done prior work, which is for it to bring to fruition under a Jupiter trine. But if not, yeah, it's a good time. But at the end of a good time, then you go on to the next thing, and it's less fruitful that way. But yeah, overall, listen, I totally agree. I'll take a Jupiter trine anytime.
No kidding.
This is one of the things that with astrology, you can feel it. It is obvious, palpable. It's there. You just notice this optimism. You feel better. Jupiter is great. In contrast to, say, I don't know, a Saturn square maybe would be one of the toughest, where you feel, even a Saturn conjunction can be more on the miserable side. Yeah.
It's always nice to have the big planets on your side. But as I tell clients, You could have all the good luck on a chart. I could pull all the wonderful cards in the world, but if you haven't done the work to be able to earn what you need, what's going on, you're not going to get there. I mean, we have to do our part. That's our free will part. Are we going to work with it? Are we going to just say, I'm going to wait till the planets get, till the fate's in the stars? I mean, I think our fate is very heavily pictured in the stars, because and I think when you start to understand that and attach to it, you begin to understand the cyclical nature of this life, other lives, and how other energy patterns move. I just heard a fascinating lecture about a woman who she had a difficult time teaching until she found out that all the kids in a school year would normally have the same Jupiter. So she would set her lessons to how that style would work, that Jupiterian style would work in that year. And it made the kids more cohesive and it made it easier. Now, she said there's going to be a little bit of one side or the other sometime with the science in those classes. But basically, you have all your kids on the same page and they begin to work kind of cooperatively. Unless they're Pisces Jupiters, in which you just have to keep them awake long enough to finish the school year.
That's funny. Yeah, well, I mean, look, you said in a way you hit upon one of the key principles, work. So you could say that everything around life on Earth, probably the first ruler, other than the sun being the lord of the solar system, but Saturn is probably the planet that we are tasked to most learn, because Saturn rules form. Anything you're going to give form, this is what life is about for anyone. They're always trying to give form to something. They're trying to create something. So the sun is the pure creativity, the fiery energy, the fuel, but it creates through Saturn, and that Saturn makes a form. And Saturn rules work. It doesn't rule, sitting around. It rules work. Then if you don't take care of Saturn, your chart suffers. It suffers because no matter how many great ideas you have, no matter how much, whatever you're playing with, it's only when you bring things into reality, Saturn again, right? And
right.
So, yeah. And so if a person has been working away, then it's the meaning of that adage that says luck is when opportunity, it's the fruition of work, when an opportunity then shows up to materialize that work or something along those lines. So yeah, it's absolutely true what you said, through the lens of astrology as well. Saturn being the planet reflecting that.
Yeah, but you can pedal faster in your astrologic world, Andre, because Saturn is still square my natal sun and Uranus at the same time. Thank you.
In your natal chart.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and one vantage point is to say, I have this Saturn, Sun, Uranus, Sun square, and you can name, a few things that are difficult about it. Like, I don't know, Saturn, as soon as you put Saturn and Uranus to the sun at the same time, it's difficult to distinguish between what you should do or what you think you're obliged to and what you really want to do, which is the Uranian thing. So that's where people maybe have a certain conflict or whatever. But if you work through it, having that problem is actually better than not having it, because then you have this extra power to resolve something, and it comes through as a person with more gravitas, let's say that. So, and you see this a lot, that the charts of people that are successful tend to have conflicts that they have to resolve. If the person has too many trines and sextiles, yeah, they enjoy life, but they're not particularly interested in doing all that much, and the famous thing, the people will say, oh, I have a grand trine. Grand trines are a gift of nature, sort of, but they can make a person too comfortable and too ready to believe in something that may not be true. They'll carry around some kind of self-created emotional, arrangement or view of life. And when you're probing, you realize, they're kind of stuck in a loop. What the grand trine is, instead of being in a more dynamic type of arrangement. So everything is like that. You have to look at both sides of the coin.
Well, just think, I have all those grand challenges, but I have lovely people like you to come on my show and talk to me about them.
There you go. Good point.
And really, there are times when I look at my chart and I know, just like I always say, I know just enough astrology to be dangerous. And I'll look at my chart and I'll go, oh, really? And then I'll realize that it's pushed me to go to places I wouldn't have gone otherwise. And I agree with you. I always think of a person who has a lot of grand trines on their chart, that there's like a person who was born on third base and they think they almost hit a home run, They haven't had to work for much of anything.
Yeah, no, and it's sort of the notion that the persons, they can settle in a place where there won't be much growth. It'll just be whatever they've picked up to that point. It's working well enough for them. So then when they get the challenging transits, it's harder because they're not used to pivoting and changing gears.
Mm-hmm.
They're too comfortable. Or other times it's simply that the person just isn't that interested in any kind of dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
So then, I don't know that you would ever call them a loser or anything like that, but they can be people that in that sense are not going to be inventing new things or being particularly influential because they're comfortable. And that's okay too.
Trust me, there have been days when I would have taken a little bit of comfort, but I always tell people when we talk about squares and oppositions and even conjunctions, depending on what the thing is, what you're looking at, that without those elements in our lives, whether it's in the planets or in our personal right now today between us and another being, we never get pushed to go anywhere. We'd all want to sit and be fat and happy and eating chocolates on the couch. And
yeah, that's true. That's true. And matter of fact, it's another one of those things that you discover if you look around to what books that have been published and whatnot. You pick up a book on relationships, and the way they would put together the book. There's one that's been around since forever by someone named Sargent, I believe. And what they're doing is they're saying, okay, if you have Venus square the other person's Mars, or if you have Saturn, all the different possible alignments, and you start to notice that if it's trine or sextile, oh, this is cool, you like each other, everything is great. And if it's square or opposed, oh, the bad arguments, it all sounds negative. The problem is when people make meaningful relationships, it never happens unless there's at least one major square or more, because squares are dynamic. And if you're going to feel a spark, a kind of magnetic pull towards someone, of course, you don't realize that the other side of that coin is that maybe later they're going to irritate you too, but it doesn't matter. It's needed in order to jumpstart the relationship, because instinctively people are both agreeing to be together and they're agreeing to grow together, and the growth needs the tension, right? So they're extremely necessary. And there was an astrologer in the 20th century, Dane Rudyard, who he was one of the first to say that if you look at anybody's chart and you want to know how they became influential, powerful, whatever, it's through their hard aspects, not their easy aspects. The easy aspects assist the work they're doing to sort through their digging at things through the hard aspects, right? So this gives new meaning to whatever it is you're looking at, that someone might say, oh, look, you have whatever, Pluto square, whatever. Oh, that's bad. No, it's not. You just have to figure out how to channel it, how to properly express it, right? And I agree, that can take time. It can be a journey, but the astrology can assist you in that, whatever the aspect is, right? Say it's a Saturn square, then the moon is going through there 4 times a month. Right. You get to feel, what does that feel like? How did I feel around then? And this is where you're doing self-study, and hopefully over time, you learn how to express that energy better. And when you do, your chart works better. And including that, take, for example, let's take a case of Saturn square Venus, right? We said earlier how Venus, as the ruler of Taurus and Libra, Venus rules a person's perception of beauty. If they have Saturn to Venus, they might have some kind of maybe hang up about their beauty, or, they think, oh, they're not attractive enough. So then, because Saturn is there, they're going to have to work at that, right? They're going to have to learn how to do that. And then they do this usually takes years. They're hacking away. And then they're the person that writes the book about how to do it. Because why? Because they had to explore and learn it. If they have Saturn trine Venus, they just think, well, what's the problem? I don't have any problem with that. Then they can't give you insight on it, right? So
that's right.
This is where the curse becomes the blessing, so to speak.
And isn't comparing two charts like that? Isn't that called synastry?
Synastry.
Yeah. So
it sounds a little bit like sinister, but it's not.
I know. You're going to do what to my chart?
Yeah. Well, there's the synastry, which is you take a chart and you put the other person's chart on the outside to see what they're doing to you. You flip them around. And then the other way you can do it is you do something called a composite chart, which is the chart for the relationship itself, which also vibrates pretty neatly. You'll see planets as they transit the composite, things happen to the relationship. I know it sounds a little bit strange because it's not a real chart in that it's taking what it is the midpoints of the two charts, right? So for instance, if someone is born at right at the beginning of fall, they're like 0 Libra, right? And then someone who's born exactly at the beginning of, say, for example, what would be a good example? Let's take, they're born at 0 Sagittarius, which is, it would be around the 21st of November, let's say.
Right.
Okay, well, their composite sun is halfway, so it would be 0 Scorpio. So even though they're a Libra and a Sagittarius, their relationship is vibing through Scorpio. And even though a skeptic would say, well, that just seems improbable. How can you tell me there's this? Trust me, you take that chart, you start transiting it, and people will tell you, oh, yeah, that's when we did such and such. Or that, oh, yeah, we were dealing with finances then. Or we were dealing with, in other words, it's the houses and the signs of that chart, independent of their individual charts. So it's
right.
That way.
It's the conglomerate. In other words, it's sort of right.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool. Well, we've done an hour.
Oh, we have. The time just flew by.
I know. So I need to have you come back and just explain what a yod is to me and all those other weird forms that are on charts.
Oh, for sure. We can do that. Yeah. The yod is also called the finger of God.
Yes, I know that. And I have one poor friend who has 3 of them on his natal chart.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah, he's the one who's died. He's died twice on the operating room table and come back to life. So,
and you know why? Do you want me to say that really quickly before we sign?
Sure.
Well, because the yod, think of, this is going back to the, think of the natural chart. 0 Aries is the ascendant. So then you throw a line to 0 Virgo or a line to 0 Scorpio. That's what makes a yod, because it's 150 directions, and then Virgo sextiles Scorpio. So you get it
right.
Well, Virgo is health and Scorpio is death. Person with yods is very likely to experience those factors more strongly. If they have 3 yods, they're going to report whatever.
He had him, and when I found out about yods, he said, "Oh, what? Look at my yods," because I have his chart in a mechanical program on my phone, and I went, "Yeah, 3 of them." He said, "What's that mean?" I said, "I have no idea. That's more than I've ever seen. I have 2," and I thought I was being beaten up by it, but he. He has lived a fascinating and died a couple times in very fascinating ways, and he's still chugging along.
Yeah, no, and I mean, it's just also, you see where the other side of it would be that if you have a yod, the great mystic Meher Baba, who spent the biggest portion of his life, he didn't talk. He stopped talking and he just meditated. A yod. And the thing about a yod is that because you're connecting it to really important houses that are at the same time a little threatening, there's a possibility to go really deep. Like, think back when I said about Nadal in the 8th, he's not really using it to resurrect. So literally a person with a yod could die to themselves and resurrect as this divine being. I mean, where you really, not only are you going to be much happier because of your connection just for yourself, but also what you can do for others. So it has potential, which is why it's called the finger of God. But the potential is one side. The other side is
living with it. The other thing, all those lovely potentials, and then living with it. Who wants to be godlike? Who wants to go through those things?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Sure.
Well, thank you so much for coming, and we'll be back. I want you to come back to the garden and we'll come up with some more fun things to look at, kind of long-term in astrology.
All right. It was a pleasure. It was a pleasure.
And thank everyone who's watching, and we appreciate it. Remember, you have your own channel. I have my own channel. Like, subscribe to both of us, then you'll never miss anything. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.